the anarcho-Christian podcast, evaluating the relationship between the Christian and the state.
Give us a king to rule us when you're gone. His life's work had been to help the people understand it's not the role of a man to rule over other men.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, as most of you know, I recently broke my wrist, and I had pins put in and a plate holding it all together, but it is healing well, and I appreciate all of the support and the prayers that y'all sent out. So, as I took a little time to heal, I read a particularly funny remark on Facebook from my friend Tom. In case you missed it, this is what he said. Just think, your fracture provided a job for a couple of doctors and a surgeon, as well as a few nurses. Maybe you should do an episode on the broken wrist fallacy when you get back. I honestly laughed out loud when I read that, and it's a really good idea. So, that's what we're doing today. So if you're not familiar with what he's referring to with the broken wrist fallacy, it's an economic essay that was written by Bastiat and is typically referred to as the broken window fallacy. You might see libertarian or Austrian economists reference it pretty quickly on a fairly regular basis. So if you're not familiar with the broken window fallacy or Bastiat, this is a great opportunity to include it into our growing catalog of evergreen topics. Because even though this was written in 1850, it is every day, in every economy, completely relevant. First, though, let's do a quick bio on Frédéric Bastiat. He was a French economist born in 1801 and died December 24th, 1850. His most referenced work is probably The Law, which was originally published in 1850 as well. You'll find it on most Intro to Libertarian reading lists, and for good reason. It's not very long, it's easily understood, and contains quotable phrases like legalized plunder. It's also full of well-articulated economic and moral realities, such as this. Socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to it being done at all. We disapprove of state education. Then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion. Then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-enforced equality. Then they say that we are against equality. And so on and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. I do not dispute their right to invent social combinations, to advertise them, to advocate them, and to try them upon themselves, at their own expense and risk. But I do dispute their right to impose these plans upon us by law, by force, and to compel us to pay for them with our taxes. So I'm sure you can see why I chose that particular portion, as it is something that people that are anarchists or libertarians get accused of all the time. You know, we say that we don't want the state to handle it, so automatically you don't like it. It's the roads, it's helping people at all. So that, I thought, was a very well articulated response to that claim. So in 1850, he also printed the essay that which is seen and that which is not seen. Included in this essay was what is called the parable of the broken window, aka the broken window fallacy. Bastiat uses this parable to explore the economic fallacy that destruction creates economic progress. He uses the simple parable of a window, but it applies to even bigger events like natural disasters and even war. So, does a broken window and its repair stimulate and progress the economy? Like what Tom referenced, did the breaking of my wrist employ many doctors and nurses, stimulating and progressing the economy? Let's dig into this supposed fallacy and find out. I'll read the introduction and the first section titled The Broken Window. It was written addressing people of his day, much like one of my favorite podcasts, Contra Krugman, hosted by Tom Woods and Bob Murphy. Side note, if you aren't subscribed to that, you really should be. But getting back to what I was saying, it's addressed directly to, an economist that has contradicting ideas, right? So in this essay, there are a few French names mentioned, and I'll probably mess up the pronunciations. Anyways, let's get on with the broken windows. The introduction starts. In the Department of Economy, an act, a habit, an institution, a law gives birth not only to the effect, but to a series of effects. Of these effects, the first only is immediate. It manifests itself simultaneously with a cause. It is seen. The others unfold in succession. They are not seen. It is well for us if they are foreseen. Between a good and a bad economist, this constitutes the whole difference. The one takes account for the visible effects. The other takes account both of the effects which are seen and also of those which it is necessary to foresee. Now, this difference is enormous, for it almost always happens that when the immediate consequence is favorable, the ultimate consequences are fatal, and the converse. Hence, it follows that the bad economist pursues a small present good, which will be followed by a great evil to come, while the true economist pursues a great good to come at the risk of a small present evil. In fact, it is the same in the science of health, arts, and in that of morals. It often happens that the sweeter the first fruit of a habit is, the more bitter are the consequences. Take, for example, debauchery, idleness, prodigality. When, therefore, a man absorbed in the effect which is seen has not yet learned to discern those which are not seen, he gives way to fatal habits, not only by inclination, but by calculation. This explains the fatally grievous condition of mankind. Ignorance surrounds its cradle. Then its actions are determined by their first consequences, the only ones which, in this first stage, it can see. It is only in the long run that it learns to take account of the others. It has to learn this lesson from two very different masters, experience and foresight. Experience teaches effectually, but brutally. It makes us acquainted with all the effects of an action by causing us to feel them, and we cannot fail to finish by knowing that fire burns, if we have burned ourselves. For this rough teacher, I should like, if possible, to substitute a more gentle one. I mean foresight. For this purpose, I shall examine the consequences of certain economical phenomena, by placing in opposition to each other those which are seen and those which are not seen. Part 1. The Broken Window. Have you ever witnessed the anger of a good shopkeeper, James B., when his careless son happened to break a pane of glass? If you have been present at such a scene, you will most assuredly bear witness to the fact that every one of the spectators, were there even 30 of them, by common consent apparently, offered the unfortunate owner this invariable consolation. It is an ill wind that blows nobody good. Everybody must live, and what would become of the glaziers if panes of glass were never broken? Now, this form of condolence contains an entire theory, which it will be well to show up in this simple case, seeing that it is precisely the same at that which, unhappily, regulates the greater part of our economical institutions. Suppose it cost 6 francs to repair the damage, and you say that the accident brings 6 francs to the glazier's trade, that it encourages that trade to the amount of 6 francs. I grant it. I have not a word to say against it. You reason justly. The glazier comes, performs his task, receives his 6 francs, rubs his hands, and, in his heart, blesses the careless child. All this is that which is seen. But if, on the other hand, you come to the conclusion, as is too often the case, that it is a good thing to break windows, that it causes money to circulate, and that the encouragement of industry in general will be the result of it, you will oblige me to call out, "Stop there. Your theory is confined to that which is seen. It takes no account of that which is not seen." It is not seen that our shopkeeper has spent 6 francs upon one thing. He cannot spend them upon another. It is not seen that if he had not had a window to replace, he would perhaps have replaced his old shoes, or added another book to his library. In short, he would have employed his 6 francs in some way, which this accident has prevented. Let us take a view of industry in general, as affected by this circumstance. The window being broken, the glazier's trade is encouraged to the amount of 6 francs. This is that which is seen. If the window had not been broken, the shoemaker's trade, or some other, would have been encouraged to the amount of 6 francs. This is that which is not seen. And if that which is not seen is taken into consideration, because it is a negative fact, as well as that which is seen, because it is a positive fact, it will be understood that neither industry in general nor the sum total of national labor is affected, whether windows are broken or not. Now let us consider James B. himself. In the former supposition, that of the window being broken, he spends 6 francs, and has neither more nor less than he had before, the enjoyment of a window. In the second, where we suppose the window not to have been broken, he would have spent 6 francs in shoes, and would have had at the same time the enjoyment of a pair of shoes and of a window. Now, as James B. forms a part of society, must come to the conclusion that taking it all together and making an estimate of its enjoyments and its labors, it has lost the value of the broken window. Whence we arrive at this unexpected conclusion: society loses the value of things which are uselessly destroyed. And we must assent to the maxim which will make the hair of protectionists stand on end. To break, to spoil, to waste is not to encourage national labor, or, more briefly, destruction is not profit. What will you say, Moniteur Industriel? Disciples of good M.F. Chamans, who has calculated with so much precision how much trade would gain by the burning of Paris, from the number of houses it would be necessary to rebuild. I am sorry to disturb these ingenious calculations, as far as their spirit has been introduced into our legislation, but I beg him to begin them again, by taking into the account that which is not seen and placing it alongside that which is seen. The reader must take care to remember that there are not two persons only, but three concerned in the little scene which I have submitted to his attention. One of them, James B., represents the consumer, reduced by an act of destruction to one enjoyment instead of two. Another, under the title of the glazier, shows us the producer, whose trade is encouraged by the accident. The third is the shoemaker, or some other tradesman, whose labor suffers proportionately by the same cause. It is this third person who is always kept in the shade, and who, personating that which is not seen, is a necessary element of the problem. It is he who shows us how absurd it is to think we see a profit from an act of destruction. It is he who will soon teach us that it is not less absurd to see a profit in a restriction, which is, after all, nothing else than a partial destruction. Therefore, if you will only go to the root of all arguments which are adduced in its favor, all you will find will be the paraphrase of this vulgar saying: what would become of the glaziers if nobody ever broke windows? So, in this short section, we see a thorough understanding of what Bastiat called the seen and unseen. In the other sections, he addresses other things like taxes, public works, fine arts, and disbanding troops. But I think the reason why this section is what's singled out so much is because it thoroughly ends the idea that destruction is good for the economy. So I really liked the idea of the section where he really points out that destruction is not profit. And then he sarcastically asks the disciples of a current economist what they think about all of it, since this economist calculated the gain around rebuilding after Paris burned to the ground. Therefore, tying this to the major and or natural disasters that I mentioned earlier. As far as the war question, we regularly hear the phrase, war is good for the economy. Now, another libertarian favorite, Henry Hazlitt, answers it in his must-read Economics in One Lesson. It is never an advantage to have one's plants destroyed by shells or bombs unless those plants have already become valueless or acquired a negative value by depreciation and obsolescence. Plants and equipment cannot be replaced by an individual or a socialist government unless he or it has acquired or can acquire the savings, the capital accumulation, to make the replacement. But war destroys accumulated capital. Complications should not divert us from recognizing the basic truth that the wanton destruction of anything of real value is always a net loss, a misfortune, or a disaster, and whatever the offsetting conditions in a particular instance can never be, on net balance, a boon or a blessing. So there you have it. The broken wrist fallacy. Was the economy overall helped? Or could the money have been better spent not repairing something that was already working? Now, I know that's true. But it's a good exercise to look at what was the seen and consider the unseen. Even if one sector experiences growth or stimulus, what is the loss and hidden cost of the other sectors? And consider the much larger and costly implications like war. And this being anarcho-Christian, I thought I'd throw in one more quote from Bastiat, and it is from the law as well. And I think that it really sums up a lot of what we talk about in our Christian anarchism. God has given to man all that is necessary for them to accomplish their destinies. He has provided a social form as well as a human form. And these social organs of humans are so constituted that they will develop themselves harmoniously in the clean air of liberty. Away then with the quacks and organizers. Away with their rings, chains, hooks, and pincers. Away with their artificial systems. Away with their whims of governmental administrators, their socialized projects, their centralization, their tariffs, their government schools, their state religions, their free credit, their bank monopolies, their regulations, their restrictions, their equalization by taxation, and their pious moralizations. And now that the legislators and do-gooders have so futilely inflicted so many systems upon society, may they finally end where they should have begun. May they reject all systems and try liberty. For liberty is an acknowledgement of faith in God and His works. So, I'll have a link to these quotes and books that I mentioned in the show notes if you'd like to spend a little bit more time reviewing them. I recommend checking out the rest of the essay, That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen. Don't forget to subscribe to the Anarcho-Christian podcast on whatever podcatcher you're using. If you're not sure where to find us, visit anarchochristian.com/subscribe. There you'll find links to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Android, Google Play, and YouTube. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider letting us know by leaving a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or wherever you catch the episodes. Also, like and share the episodes on Facebook or the other social media sites. You can also support the show with a monthly donation through Patreon. Visit the support tab on anarchochristian.com. That'll take you to our Patreon page where you'll find a few ways that you can support us. So, I think that's it for today. Grace and peace, no king but Christ.
Power is illusion, the need to rule is greed. Your love and your light is really all they need. It's really all we need.
Thank you for listening to the Anarcho-Christian Podcast. Subscribe to our email notifications at anarchochristian.com, like us on facebook.com/anarchochristian, and follow us on Twitter at anarchoxp. Subscribe to our podcast and YouTube to join us next time as we continue to evaluate the relationship between the Christian and the state. No king but Christ.
This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.
God said there's a season for